Fling your fireball, shoot your bow, and all while having fun as a ranged DPS. And what are the most fun ranged DPS specs in the game currently? Does meta matter? Probably not really, no. Although all of them do really good damage, what is the most fun way to engage with all of these specs? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. And we're gonna start it off really quick, no bullshit, with Affliction. Dude, Affliction is... I said we're not going to talk about meta, and I meant it. We're not going to talk about meta, and that's great, because it wouldn't be a fun conversation to have if we talked with Affliction. And that's so weird, because Affliction is really fun. It could be because I personally am a fan of dot specs, and the way Affliction is doing its damage in dungeons as well is really fun, and in raids is just that really nice balance of intricate and actually juggling a couple of plate spinning rather, to kind of optimize your damage output. Yeah, the fact that the damage output is not the best, although don't get me wrong, Affliction is pumping. It's doing damage. It's not gonna compete with, you know, your Arcane Mages, your Subtlety Rogues, or any kind of rogues, really, but it's doing really good. The fact that it's not topping the meters in terms of its damage does take away a little bit of the fun, because let's be honest, rotation, execution, talent builds, and all of that is definitely are definitely the biggest contributors to fun, but if you're not gonna put out the damage, it's not gonna happen. So I will put it around B tier. I think in terms of his design, Affliction is on a good path of becoming a good design DPS spec. In terms of a dot playstyle, I think the numbers are just lackluster for what you do, but the fact that you can just spread dots in AoE really efficiently with Seed of Corruption, and the fact that you can juggle, and the changes that they made to some of the capstones in the last couple of patches have been really good for Affliction in terms of its fun playstyle. It's just that the numbers are not quite there, and that actually matters. Augmentation is always a hit or miss for me. The theme of it, I like. I like the theme of casting earth spells, empowering allies, although I kind of wanted, obviously, matters when it comes to fun. Black dragon spells should have been a tank spec. Well, listen, I'm not gonna beat that dead horse with a stick again, but outside of that, Augmentation actually gets a little bit boring for me. I played it, every time I play it, I'm just not that into it. It didn't pull me into the spec. Obviously, it's all the Evoker aesthetics, which also play a part into me enjoying or not enjoying the spec, so that also drags away from it. I will put it into C tier, because in terms of Evoker playstyle, if you can get away from the aesthetics of the skinny lizard, which is not how I envision my dragon to be, and the fact that, you know, the rotation gets a little bit bland, it actually has some cool mechanics. The mobility is really nice. The way that you're actually empowering your allies and seeing how that actually affects the overall combat is also really nice. But outside of that, there's just way too many drawbacks to see Augmentation any higher, and I think even in C tier, that's me being very generous. Balanced Druid is... it's my main. It's my main for a reason. It is really fun. Now, I know this is the second dot spec on this list. Balanced Druid is just not for everybody, and that's okay. It's not for everybody. It's dots, but it is a very simple spec, and it has some of the least, if not zero, RNG, which is definitely an appeal to some people, because not everybody loves RNG. And it has a lot more mobility than you might think. You still have to hard cast quite a bit, and there are moments in your rotation where you have to hard cast no matter what, and moments when you can just like reapply dots and do all of that stuff, particularly at the beginning of your burst windows or your pulsar windows, or whenever you're kind of stacking up on new moons, you kind of have to hard cast, and that is a little bit annoying, but not as annoying as it used to be at the beginning of Dragonflight. Now it's a lot better, and it's one of the most satisfying specs to pull off. It's very flashy, it's very meaty, you feel every damage that you do. I would wish the ramp up would be a little bit less of an issue, because it can definitely take a page out of the Affliction book and other dot specs on this list. And as we move into Arcane, you can see that the footage is crisp and clean. So let me tell you how we got it. With Outplayed, of course, the sponsor of this video. Whenever you need to record some gameplay, that can be other games besides WoW as well, Outplayed makes it super easy and quick. Once you set up the type of recording you want to do, whether it is full game sessions, manual recording, or match recording for some specific titles, you just pop open your game and let the magic happen. Outplayed is free to get. All you have to do is click the link in the description, follow the quick install instructions, and you will be supporting our content as well. Cheers Outplayed for sponsoring this video. Now let's see where Arcane actually ends up. Arcane has actually been a spec that surprisingly I played a lot more than I thought I would ever play. It's actually my most played mage spec. It's my second most played ranged DPS spec out of all of them in this list. And if that doesn't give it away, then let's just place it right now. I still think Arcane is a particularly difficult spec to play, which does impede its fun factor for some people. Not for me particularly, because I actually like a challenge. I like to kind of figure things out. It's not that hard once you get used to it. It's a little bit mechanically punishing, especially with the single target opener, which is usually a little bit more complex, and it gets easier the more you play it. You just have a lot of plates to spin, but you spin them all the same way every time. It's kind of like how oh, this is such a good analogy. So learning Arcane is kind of like learning how to drive, right? When you start driving, you're actively thinking about the steering wheel, shifting gears, hitting your clutch, and always checking your rear view mirrors and all of that, right? But the more you do it, the more you instinctively do that without actually thinking, mechanically rather, right? So that's kind of how Arcane is. It has like all of these parts that kind of always have to work, and you have to always really think about all of them. But once you play it enough, it becomes like second nature. So it's a little bit easier, and it's really fun to actually play a mage. It's incredibly tanky as a mage spec. You are actually a mage. You do interact with the mage kit and the dungeon slightly different than, at least in my opinion, than what I have been used to by playing Fire and Frost, which is very refreshing. And not to mention that Arcane actually does a lot of damage. I think right now it's still one of the best raid specs, period, at least on heroic, and in dungeons is not too shabby either. It might not have the flexibility of Fire or Frost, but it does really good damage when it needs to. Beast Mastery has always been a fan favorite of mine. Fan favorite, I'm the fan. And I think it's a really fun spec. I don't know if I should put it into S tier. I always love it. I did main it actually once. It didn't really change much since then. I think it's a much better spec now. I feel like a lot of the fun for Beast Mastery comes from the tier set, which that's great, but you're gonna lose the tier set and it's not gonna be as fun anymore. Whereas Balance and Arcane, although they have really good tier sets, they are fun on their own, and they don't feel like they're being carried by their tier set, which is definitely what BM Hunter feels like for me, since the tier set is actually really good and it's really fun. But I feel like that needs to be incorporated into the spec, and if they do that, that could easily make BM, as far as I'm concerned, an S tier spec. And it's funny because, you know, it's an easy spec, but I like Arcane, so it's good. BM is still the most relaxing spec to play in the game, since you can obviously do your rotation on the move and you have unlimited mobility. I cannot tell you how satisfying, relaxing, and refreshing that is to just go in and feel like nothing can literally stop you from just playing your spec. No other spec does this except Beast Mastery Hunter. Demo Warlock has also been on an interesting journey when it comes to its Dragonflight design. It's really good in terms of overall performance, and it has always been one of my favorite Warlock specs. I'm gonna put it into A tier, a little bit behind Beast Mastery, just because they kind of touched Nether Portal in the way that I don't particularly like Nether Portal to be touched. And I really enjoyed the concept of summoning a big Pit Lord, but as far as everything I've been able to see concerning Demonology, they're kind of putting like a ceiling in terms of its scaling cap, which is something that Demonology always did really cool, especially when it comes to its Tyrant. Your Tyrant cannot scale indefinitely anymore, unless they've changed that, and I haven't paid attention to it, but that's kind of what's keeping Demonology from being any higher. Destruction Warlock is kind of like BM Hunter, but it just is just not that fun anymore. I'm gonna put it into B tier. I cannot put it on the same level as Augmentation. It's not as fun anymore as it used to. Dimensional Portal, I don't know how it's called, is so boring. It's so boring. Sure, it can sometimes do good damage, and it's nice that you're actually going down to the left-hand side of the talent tree to grab some capstones out of that part, but other than that, it's just not fun. I feel like as degenerate and as much as I dislike degeneracy when it comes to specs being played, I think the Shadowlands version of the Destruction was one of its best iteration, especially towards the end when they've tuned it down and it wasn't 110% degenerate, because it was fun to spam, to build up soul shards really quickly and spend them really quickly. That is really fun, at least in the AoE. And its Chaos Bolts used to be a lot more impactful. Particularly, I remember when I mostly enjoyed Destruction was probably in BFA, when the Chaos Bolts would slap. Sure, they've addressed it since, but it doesn't really feel the same anymore, and that's kind of where Destruction is. Fire Mage has sometimes been one of my least favorite ranged DPS specs to play, but mostly because it's a mage. I have come around to that. I cannot put it in A tier still. I think it's a really fun and well-designed DPS spec. It's obviously one of the strongest range specs in the game currently, and it's really, really good. I feel like it's just missing slightly, like one thing. This is, I don't know what it is, but I feel like it's missing like one thing for me to go like, oh, my name is Flame, I like to play Fire Mage. Like, it's still a while until I get to that point. I think Fire Mage is really cool. I think it does all of the mage stuff really nicely. I think what makes Fire Mage fun is not necessarily related to fire, but more related to mage. The mage utility, the blinks, the shields, the clones, the changes to ice block, all of that makes playing mage way more fun. Not particularly the fire part of it. I feel like for fire, they just need to make it not necessarily more explosive, but maybe more meteors, maybe more phoenix flames where they matter, since fireballs and flame strikes is just, it's the same. It's, for me, it's kind of the same. I know it's slightly different. But it feels overall, in the grand scheme of things, kind of the same. Frost Mage, similar to Fire Mage, but I do enjoy Frost Mage a little bit more because you have that big build up to that big payoff of Glacial Spike, which is fantastic. I'm so glad that they made Glacial Spike good again, and I think I've been saying that about Frost Mage for a while now. Plus, I'm also a very much enjoyer of Freezing Rain and Frozen Orb playstyles. I think it's really fun to cast Blizzards and Frozen Orbs in AoE and cast more Blizzards and more Frozen Orbs in AoE. I think that's what a mage is. It's Blizzard, it's the company, it's the spell. It's what I enjoyed playing on my, let's say, sorcerer type characters in my RPGs the most, and I think Frost really does it really well. Not as much as Arcane though, but it's slightly better. Marksmanship also has been on a journey in Dragonflight. I kind of like it. It's a fun spec for me to play, but I can never really stick to it too much. I think the tier set is doing some good stuff with it. I'm gonna put it into B tier, but I still feel like it's missing something. It's similar to Fire Mage, but I usually like a marksmanship way more, but I feel like it's just not on the same level as Mage anymore. And it probably has a lot to do with the Hunter class. Funny enough, it's kind of like the juxtaposition of Fire Mage as well, where the class part is actually pulling it back, whereas there are some fun interactions with volley bursts and having instant trick shots. I feel like Wind Arrows, whatever that capstone is, I can never for the life of me remember it, could be more interesting. I feel like it's forcing Serpent Sting too much, and I don't like it. I don't think it's an interesting playstyle unless they double down on it. They can make Serpent Sting more interesting if they want to keep that as a marksmanship thing, although that was kind of like a survival thing for the most part. But hey, I'm not gonna judge. It's all good. Firing rapid fires and aim shots is always really fun, and having insane range is also really fun. But all of the Hunter kit doesn't feel that great on marksmanship as it does on survival and beast mastery for me personally, so that's where it's going to be. Devastation, funnily enough, is similar to Augmentation. I feel like the spec is kind of fun, but it gets a little bit boring fast. I think I'm gonna put it into B tier. I think there has to be a difference between Devastation and Augmentation. Obviously, I've mained Devastation, well, Preservation and Devastation in the first patch of Dragonflight, so I played it quite a bit. It has since improved in terms of its overall design. I haven't seen a Devastation player in a year? Nobody plays Devastation, dude. Nobody. I think actually in the last couple of months, or last couple of weeks rather, we've seen more and more Devastations than Augmentation, since Augmentation is actually falling a little bit behind in terms of its overall numbers that it provides, and people are like, okay, well, if I'm not gonna blast with the Augmentation, I might as well just play the Devastation and do a little bit more damage. Outside of that, if the concept of a fire-breathing dragon, spellcaster dragon, would have been implemented slightly different in WoW, I could see Devastation being an easy A tier for me. I think it's fun and rewarding and satisfying to hit your spells. It's kind of like how Havoc was in BFA, where it's the new class. It doesn't feel like it has a lot. Like, the death isn't there, the talent intricacies isn't there, there's way too many passives that kind of don't really feel that impactful, at least for me. Obviously, there are a couple that are really good, but I feel like Devastation is just missing an extra layer of death that would make it an insanely fun range spec to play. Elemental Shaman. Ooh, this is a hard one. This is also a spec that I've been playing a little bit, and I'm actually gearing my Shaman quite a bit. I'm more on the enhancement side as of now, and I still need to play Elemental a little bit. Listen, the meatball spam is crazy. It's really fun. I think I'm gonna put it into S tier It has always been one of my casters of choice, way above Balanced Druid and any mage spec whatsoever. I'm not gonna put it in front of Arcane because as much as I love throwing meatballs around, it gets a little bit bland. Well, plus I love Earthquakes, and I'm kind of sad to kind of see that go in AoE. You might use an Earthquake here and there, sure, every now and again. But Elemental is still a good spec, and I might go on a limb here. Well, actually, no. I was gonna say that Elemental is harder than Arcane, but it used to be. Not if you get the new tier set. It actually has simplified the spec, which maybe that's actually a good thing because we definitely need more elemental shamans out there. And I think one of the barriers that kept a lot of people from going into it and discovering how fun it actually is was the difficulty level in pulling it off, because doing a lot of damage with elemental prior to the season was very hard. It didn't do I don't know, Balanced Druid or Shadow Priest level of AoE damage or Fire Mage level of AoE damage or single target damage either, but it did do really high damage, but it was, you had to work a lot more for it. Let's just call it that, okay? And last but not least, Shadow Priest has taken a dip for me, a big dip. It used to be my all-time favorite, close to Boomkin, spec of Dragonflight to play ranged DPS or DPS actually, period. But it's not, probably I'm not doing it just if I put it there. Maybe I cannot decide between Destro and Shadow. They're equally as fun, or as boring rather, because they're kind of like middle of the curve. I'm not a big fan of losing Minds here. I thought that was really cool. I was building up my insanity, building up this resource bar for AoE, and then just spending it all at once, and the explosive damage impact felt very satisfying as well. And the procs of Mind Spike were really satisfying to go through because it gave me a little bit more mobility. I really enjoyed Season 1 Shadow Priest, maybe a little bit going into Season 2, but no, I think that might have been 1007. I think 1007 might have been the best version of Shadow Priest, period. And I'm just not a fan of the new rework. What can I say? I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad spec. It is doing some crazy execute damage with its new tier set, and that's really fun. But what made Shadow Priest fun for me are a couple of things. One was the insanity mechanic that we've lost years ago, ever since BFA, where your void form was a factor of you maintaining your insanity generation all over again, and made me feel like the better I play the spec, the more I do damage, and that's something that's fun for me. But now it's static, which I mean makes the spec mechanically better to play, but it's not as fun. And they took another layer out of it with Mind Shear and making it just cleave with Psychic Link, although I do think that Psychic Link is one of the best additions to its AoE, but that was in conjunction with Mind Shear. I feel like, for instance, Assassination Rogue does a similar thing as Shadow Priest, where you do your single target rotation and it cleaves into AoE, which is what Shadow Priest kind of does with Psychic Link. You do your single target rotation and it kind of cleaves into AoE. I'm not saying you don't multi-dot or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But you took away the AoE spender and you just gave it a AoE cleave from single target, which is something that is not necessarily bad, but is not implemented right. Because once again, the best example for this is Assassination, which does it right, and Shadow Priest does not. And if they could fix that, then that would have been better. But then again, you would still have to put Mind Shear back, and I don't know if they're gonna do that because for some reason people don't like AoE spenders in AoE. Like, what is going on? And this is how the range specs are ranked in terms of how I consider them fun in a subjective manner. Of course, all of this is very subjective, although I'm interested to see what people think about their S tiers. And speaking of Assassination, we also have a most fun melee DPS, which you can check to see what are the most fun melee DPS specs in the game and kind of get a better picture for all of them right here. Click it.